Working in the security industry certainly encompasses the ability to properly communicate. Security professionals will be consistently engaging with coworkers, clients, and the public as part of their normal routines. In a prior section, we covered etiquette and security personnel consistently being professional in their language, the way they address people, and at all times when they are making contacts. Most people are able to understand and uphold these standards with minimal effort. When we hear about instruction on communication, for our purposes, we are not referring to the basics. A security guard engaging in everyday conversation, providing directions to a customer, answering property-related questions, should be relatively fundamental concepts. Our focus in this section will be the contacts and interactions when persons or with persons in what we call adversarial situations. What do we mean by adversarial? Our prior section on property rules, regulations, and codes of conduct flows into this current discussion. We will be specifically referring to times when a security guard needs to approach a person or even a group and correct their behavior, potentially outline consequences if they fail to comply, and proceed from there. Let's be honest, these types of interactions are not always pleasant, but as such, we must see the persons we are contacting as potential adversaries. Most people do not relish the role of correcting the behavior of others. Regardless, this is the position security professionals will almost inevitably find themselves in from time to time. Most people working in other jobs don't normally have this task. In fact, correcting behavior is somewhat limited to authority figures, which security professionals should accept as their stature because it is true. They are the authority figures on their properties. First and foremost, they must be professional in their approach, but they are often employing the authority granted to them as representatives of the property from their ownership and management. The ability to concentrate on approach with the utmost professionalism will be our goal in this section.
People who really want to have a good time won't come to a slaughterhouse. And we've got entirely too many troublemakers here. Too many 40-year-old adolescents, felons, power drinkers, and trustees of modern chemistry. It's going to change.
Man, that sure sounds good. But a lot of the guys who come in here, we can't handle one-on-one. Even two-on-one.
Don't worry about it. All you have to do is follow 3 simple rules. 1, never underestimate your opponent. Expect the unexpected. 2, take it outside. Never start anything inside the bar unless it's absolutely necessary. And 3, be nice.
Come on.
If somebody gets in your face and calls you a I want you to be nice.
Okay.
Ask him to walk, but be nice. If he won't walk, walk him, but be nice. If you can't walk him, one of the others will help you, and you'll both be nice. I want you to remember that it's a job. It's nothing personal.
Uh-huh. Being called a personal?
No. It's 2 nouns combined to elicit a prescribed response.
I wonder if somebody calls my mama.
Is she? I want you to be nice until it's time to not be nice.
The snippet of video is actually a PG version from the movie called Roadhouse from 1989, and the actor was Patrick Swayze. God rest his soul, he passed away in 2009. Now we're just interjecting a little humor here. I also don't want to portray it as a reality for security interactions with an adversary. Generally, security personnel are not assuming the role of bar bouncers. And while security assignments can vary based on many different circumstances, please understand negative interactions with an adversary should be the exception rather than the rule. In other words, they most likely won't be occurring in most of your interactions or contacts with people. Environment normally dictates the frequency of negative interactions. A security guard working a nightclub or a heated sporting event can probably anticipate more of these than a guard working at, let's say, a warehouse or a processing center. Above all, there is hope. Most negative interactions can be predicted, and your approach can shift the entire outcome. While Swayze was fictionally addressing authority figures who were hypothetically dealing with some pretty rowdy customers in a bar environment, some of his advice can help us understand our circumstances as well. Never underestimate your opponent, which is absolutely true. Behavior can be erratic and unpredictable. And for the most part, we are examining tactics with people who are already not playing by the rules. Now, most of this session will concentrate on your safety, the ability to anticipate trouble and adjust your approach. The other idea of being nice, well, that's easier said than done, but again, this comes full circle to us always maintaining our confidence and professionalism, no matter how ignorant an adversary might become. First off, I'm not going to promise you that these results are going to be 100% effective. This section is easy to preach, but implementing these tactics with positive results will take effort, patience, confidence, and consistency. Despite your best efforts, these interactions still may not go according to plan, and while that can be disappointing, making certain that we make the effort is what a professional does. So as we examine this section, I want your frame of mind to be that of a security guard making contact with somebody breaking the rules, not acting appropriately for your environment, perhaps acting suspiciously or abnormally. Even situations where somebody might be doing something that's dangerous. So let's dive in. For our purposes, we will consider the communication process with a potential adversary to consist of both verbal and nonverbal communication. First, let's take a look at verbal communication, which is essentially the process of sending and receiving messages. Speaking and listening, very simple concepts for everybody to understand. Regardless, different elements of the entire process can have an impact on the overall outcome of the interaction. While words are important, they don't speak for the entire process. So let's focus on nonverbal communication, and specifically broken down for us to mean body language. Now, if you research different types of nonverbal communication examples, you can find up to 60 or more variations of it. So let's not make it that complicated, as we can all pretty much understand what it breaks down to. For our purposes, it would include things like facial expressions, eye movements, gestures, hand movements, posture and stance perhaps, pretty much anything besides spoken words. Again, our focus is on adversarial contacts, not those all-encompassing communications, which are normally passive. The ones that we're going to concentrate on would be more of an aggressive nature. When I did some research about the differences of how communication is understood, that being verbal versus nonverbal communication or body language, I was surprised to see the breakdown of how differently each one of them is interpreted and how it skews towards the idea of verbal, nonverbal, or body language being interpreted much more with an emphasis than verbal communication. I also then compared it to everyday interactions and working in the industry, and a lot of that then began to make sense. So there are many studies attempting to break down the overall communication cycle and how it's understood. But the determination that I came about and through my research was that we often understand, recall, and evaluate our interactions more often through what we observed from body language or nonverbal communication than from the spoken word. The numbers vary, but it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio of being in favor of nonverbal communication being understood more clearly than verbal communication, which is going to be important for how we approach this subject matter. So with our starting points established, let's understand our goals when we're interacting with an adversary, trying to at times understand, but more often correct or alter behavior. First and foremost would be our safety. Having that interaction occur and the security professional remaining safe. Next, having a positive interaction, in other words, getting to a point where your adversary actually understands they need to correct their behavior and why they need to do so. And third would be compliance, having the adversary actually comply with your request to change their behavior or follow the direction that you've stipulated for them. A good day for a security professional in terms of adversarial interactions is achieving goal number 1, safety. No matter the outcome, you come away safe and sound. A better day is accomplishing goals number 1 and 3, both safety and compliance. You interacted safely and got the person to do what was necessary. Perhaps they were not happy with you, but they still complied, and you were safe as a result. The best day is accomplishing all 3, safety, compliance, and a positive interaction, where the adversary understood why they were corrected, or at least listened to your explanation of why it mattered. You may not accomplish all 3 goals in every interaction, so don't be discouraged by that. Getting to goals 1 and 3 are tough enough. Getting all 3, well then, you've really worked your magic in that particular interaction. So, keeping an interaction safe. We do that through attempting to communicate properly with somebody, not miscommunicating with them. This can often result in agitating them and forcing them to the incident to be escalated, potentially to even something physical. We want to also stay away from negative or disrespectful comments, sarcasm. These are things that obviously can provoke somebody in this type of a contact. And we need to be careful about this, especially people that are perhaps a little bit more seasoned in the industry, because they might be the people that are more likely to be a little bit more pessimistic about things and resort to that sarcasm or those disrespectful comments. So we want to always be careful about how safe we are and how we're creating that image right from the beginning with somebody. We've already established that security officers often interact with people, unfortunately, on some of the worst days of their lives, when they've been victims, they've have a serious medical condition, they might be the offender, they might be desperate people, ashamed, embarrassed, a number of different things. So if our contacts begin with good communication efforts, the hope would be that the overall good conclusion to the entire issue would be our outcome. This can also, point out to the fact that, people are less likely to complain if you've done everything right in an interaction. You've, done everything that you possibly could in order for that to be positive. It wasn't they could walk away from that trying to blame you because you didn't do something or you acted inappropriately. So our overall goal in all of our contacts is gaining compliance, getting people to do what we need them to do, and peacefully. If we could maybe change our mindset to the idea of motivating and encouraging people as opposed to right away starting off with forcing compliance, kind of being the tough guy about something when you're entering a situation. Let's take an example of interacting with a parent who is allowing their children to play on an escalator, which is obviously an unsafe act. If we can do that and maybe explain to that parent, we've had people that have been injured doing this before. It's quite unsafe. If you just remind your children that it's not really a good idea, as opposed to approaching that person and maybe explaining why it's stupid to allow them to have their children do that, or why would they even think of trying to do that. Maybe, okay, you may want to in your mind think that, okay, this is the way that I should react to this person, this is, I should tell them what's on my mind, but kind of moving away from that. take the approach of motivating and encouraging as opposed to right away using that force. Often successful contacts begin before they actually start. Perhaps you're being dispatched to a call. You have time in your mind to frame out that action plan. You also have the ability to be able to recollect what happened the last time you had to interact in this kind of a circumstance. Let's say you might have been dealing with a solicitor, and now you're calling to be dealing with a solicitor again. What worked in that interaction the last time? What got you to be able to have that person comply and to listen to what you needed them to do? What got in the way of your message? What might have agitated them? Right? Even if you have seconds and you need to approach somebody and correct them right on the spot, you still can tend to observe your adversary and then again try to develop that action plan in your mind. This would be the idea of reading people. Now, especially approaching an adversary this is very important. You also want to bear in mind that they're going to be watching and reading you as well. So that's why your body language is important. Being aware of the messages we're sending, and in a subsequent section we'll get a little bit deeper into reading an adversary who potentially is going to become violent with you. Now, correctly interpreting and sending the messages people are putting out is part of ensuring your personal safety. As a security manager, I would often be the person that was intercepting the complaints or comments from people that had dealt with a security professional on my staff. And some of the ones that were most disappointing were people that were complaining, but they were pointing out the fact that they actually knew they did something wrong. They knew they shouldn't have done it. They knew that it was a problem, and they understand that now. But they're talking and making a complaint because they didn't like the way that they were approached by a security officer. They didn't like something they might have specifically said to them. They thought they were rude. They didn't appreciate their approach. And again, that was very disappointing because we had that person. We had that person understanding and complying and realizing why it was important, yet we screwed it up with the entire approach. So again, the overall effort by you has to be complete. Communication is not limited to in-person interactions, although that will be the majority of interactions we review in this section. But just remember that your professionalism counts during work-related phone conversations with customers and persons inside and outside your organization. Also, any electronic methods of communicating, such as emails or text. These are oftentimes when our verbal messages are misinterpreted and there is no nonverbal context to compare it against. Let's closely examine the receiving message part of the communication cycle, which is listening, and just as important, if not more so, than sending your message to someone. When we fail to actively listen, we miss key elements about the person's true state of mind. Now, active listening is perhaps something that a majority of people can work on. We often feel compelled to make sure others hear our point of view or our comments, that we overlook and miss what the other person is saying. In essence, we talk over each other, which is counterproductive and in adversarial situations can be dangerous. Let's review some tactics which will require some patience, practice, and above all, the ability to maintain our professionalism by actively listening to our adversaries. Fully listen to your adversary and show them that you are listening. Don't interrupt them. We've all been in conversations where the other person is talking and we think of something that we need to add or correct to that conversation, and we end up interrupting them or speaking over them. In that kind of situation, neither person truly hears what the other is saying. Remain neutral. Refrain from making judgments about the person or their message. If you're judging, you're not really completely listening. This is going to be a little bit difficult for those more seasoned employees we spoke about already, who tend to be a little bit more pessimistic. Now, it's somewhat understandable that if you're dealing with somebody doing the same thing wrong repeatedly, that's going to be very, very difficult for you to remain neutral in that kind of situation because you've been down this road before. But If you can try to adjust things just for that moment in time, it might help you out a little bit. Try to hear your adversary literally. Pay attention to their words without trying to add or subtract from them, apply inferences. Again, just for that moment in time as you're dealing with that interaction. Maybe even attempt to have some empathy, which sympathy and empathy are two different things. Sympathy is feeling sorrow or regret for someone's situation. Let's say somebody has lost a loved one. We would obviously have sympathy for them, right? Empathy allows us to try to understand someone's situation. Let's say we're dealing with a person who's soliciting. We may understand why they need to solicit, they're down on their luck, but that doesn't necessarily mean we are going to support their actions. Some barriers to communication could include reacting to your adversary's comments or actions personally, allowing yourself to be baited. Now, that is going to happen in your interactions. Your adversary, that's probably the biggest thing that they normally do, is they try to bait you. They will call you names. They'll react to your profession. They'll react to your uniform. They'll say comments about family members, a whole bunch of other different things that they potentially can throw at you. You need to expect this, all right? And don't be caught off guard about it. Nobody is going to be happy about being corrected. But the reality is, a lot of times what you have to consider is they would probably react that way to anybody that is trying to correct them. If it was another security officer that was on staff that was doing it at that time. And then we don't want to ever sink to the level of our adversary. We want to remain the professional in these interactions. Try to concentrate on the issue if you can, the person, avoiding that what we'll call white noise when they're throwing nasty comments at you or calling you names or anything else like that. Remember the issue that you're actually dealing with. And again, the idea that, realistically, you normally have the upper hand in these kind of situations, but you don't want to throw that in their face, as that absolutely will agitate them as well. While it may be tempting, refrain from any type of misinformation or confusing information. Continue to provide them with that competent information, that information that you know to be correct about your property. Don't mislead them. Now, all of these things can come back and haunt you later on. If you're making impractical promises to somebody and you're not able to follow through on those, and they come back at you later about that, that's not going to be a good situation for you. You're going to have to repeat things over and over again. And then certainly not threatening any unrealistic consequences, as that will lead to your incident being exacerbated as well. You want to understand what the consequences are for your particular property. If they're true and they're real, yes, you can use them. But if they're not, or you know that they might be unreliable, you can't guarantee that somebody is going to get trespassed or their car is going to get towed or whatever consequence you're describing, then don't put it out there as a threat. Threats don't work in these kind of situations. Take stock of your own emotions on a daily basis. All right? We all have good days and we have bad days. Some days when we're going to be much better at these interactions, and other days where we're probably not going to want to get involved with them and we're going to be a little bit shaky about them, right? So we want to understand what can make us react negatively, especially when somebody is attempting to provoke us, all right? And it's almost like you have to have an acceptance of it. Okay, in particular, if somebody calls you a certain name, that is really going to kind of set you off. You have to anticipate that potentially can happen, and a professional is able to take that and deal with it and put it aside. Maybe even you have a situation where, if you're going round and round with somebody and continuing to have the same pitfalls in your conversations with them, allowing somebody else to come in and kind of take over that conversation and, kind of handing that off to somebody, that's not a bad practice. You absolutely can do that. Calling a timeout and allowing somebody come in and maybe explain it a little bit better than you can, or have a different approach with that person. You also want to recall that being defensive is really something that's going to happen if we start off a conversation with somebody with a bad attitude, if we approach that interaction negatively right from the beginning. We may have to come back to those people afterwards. We may need information from them. We may need to speak with them, so on and so forth. Defensive people aren't as willing to communicate and share information with you as well. So try to keep track of all these things as well when you're having your interactions with people. Remember to control the things that you can control from start to finish in these interactions. And while there are many things, we certainly want to understand and consider our body language and our nonverbal communication, as we pointed out, but also your professional appearance and your hygiene. These also count. All right, these are the things that have to, at a baseline perspective, be already in place when you're interacting with somebody. If something is going wrong with your appearance, with your hygiene or anything else like that, and an adversary notices that, that is going to be the focus of that entire interaction and completely throw it off. So again, another reason why you want to be that consistent professional with these ideas of uniforms and personal hygiene. Let's walk through a brief analysis of an interaction that you may have with an adversary. Again, those situations where you're dealing with people that are, they're not complying with the rules and regulations, maybe they're doing something suspicious. For the most part, they're going to break down into groups of people in one of three different groups that we will consider over here. So let's take a look as we go forward here. So the best way to instruct a lot of times is to provide an example. So let's do just that. So we'll walk through a scenario from 2020 when there was a pandemic. COVID-19 was around. And people that were visiting public environments were instructed to wear masks. It was a directive from the Department of Health normally. And private properties were charged with enforcing this. And you also have to remember that failure to wear a mask was not a crime. So it was one of those things where you couldn't turn to the police to enforce that. All right? It was something that had to be enforced from a property level. So oftentimes, you would deal with people that, were not complying with that. They were failing to wear a mask. So we're going to use and start off with that as our example here. So your first group of people that are failing to comply, they normally simply don't know that they are violating the policy. Generally, these are the easiest people to deal with, and if you simply ask them to comply, you'll normally achieve that goal. And thankfully, for the most part, this is the largest group. This might be a person that when you approach them and you point out that they're not doing what they need to do, in this case, not wearing a mask. Maybe they're saying to you, oh, well, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was required, or they're claiming some type of ignorance to it. The second type of violator is the person that thinks that it's really not a big deal. It's a minor violation of the rules, and really it's not going to hurt anybody. So it's to them, at least anyway, it's not a big deal. Maybe they're offering you some vague excuse as to why they can't comply. So the third group is the toughest. They're the ones that they do know the rules and they just simply don't care. For whatever reason, that particular person doesn't care how that rule or violation affects anybody else. They'll offer you many different arguments and perspectives, and they'll be very firm in what they think. Again, out of the three, these are the most difficult people to reverse their behavior or correct their behavior, if you will. So our goal as security professionals in these circumstances, all three of these circumstances, is to gain compliance from that person, right? Whether it be the first person, the second group of people, or the third group, the most difficult group, right? We're going to start with a standard approach to all three of them. One of the things that can be most effective is what I will call an icebreaker, where when you're approaching that person, the first thing that's coming out of your mouth is not going to be the directive to comply. The first thing that's coming out of you is going to kind of almost catch them off guard. You're going to introduce yourself, maybe even explain who you are, who you're with, although it might be obvious if you're wearing a security uniform, but just kind of establishing that, okay, I want to have a conversation with you as opposed to I want to yell at you type of a circumstance. So Patrick Swayze said it when we first began our section over here, okay? Trying to be nice, asking for compliance, politely, professionally. A lot of people will comply if you simply ask them. Maybe they're in the back of their minds are not very happy about it, but again, they might comply because, okay, they realize, you're the authority figure, you are asking them, they really should be doing it. And maybe sometimes you'll have to go even a little bit further. You'll have to provide some type of an explanation as to why you're asking them to comply. And a lot of times this is repetitive because you're doing it several times, for people that are violating. But regardless, if that's the step that you have to go to, then, take it, because this will hopefully lead you on that path of where you want to be, to compliance. So step number 3 is going to incorporate all of the elements of step number 2, except it's going to go a little bit further. This is for the person that won't really kind of give up on their objection, and they need a little bit more prodding, if you will. They need a little bit more explanation. Maybe your explanation then at that point in time becomes a little bit more stern and forceful because this does have to happen. Okay, that's the kind of the point that you're trying to make with them. In the case of COVID, all right, maybe you're even appealing to their sense of community responsibility. Our company is concerned about the rise of COVID cases and has instituted a policy to help everyone feel more comfortable. You're kind of making it seem like it's important why everybody needs to comply, if you will. So unfortunately, if you reach step number 4 where you have to be explaining the consequences. Now, that's not an enviable position for a security professional. Nobody wants to be in a position where they're having to explain, if you don't do this, then this is going to happen, the consequences, if you will. But unfortunately, if we're pushed to that level, then that's where we need to go. Again, remember, don't threaten anybody with unrealistic consequences that are just going to be simple threats at that point in time. You want to be laying out exactly what they do. The normal remedy in our situation in private property incidents where people fail to comply is asking somebody to leave. All right. So again, if we're at that point and we've exhausted every other attempt to try to get that person to comply, then unfortunately that's what we have to do. We have to go to the consequences. So something else that you want to try to consider, maybe at step number 4 or just as you're getting to step number 4 where you're explaining consequences to somebody, and this isn't always going to work in every situation or be possible, but maybe having an alternative solution. When I was using my example of a face mask being required in public, as you recall, back then there were times when if you were at a restaurant or having some food or drink, you didn't necessarily have to wear a mask. Maybe you could suggest to somebody that they take a little bit of a break and they don't have to wear a mask in the food court. You offer that as an alternative situation, and it works. It may not always work, but it's at least you trying to give some type of a offering to somebody an alternative solution where you're trying to work with them. At least they might be willing to go that extra step with you at that point in time.